Hello there, I'm Greg Sadler, and I'm really excited to tell you about a great educational opportunity that we've got for studying philosophy in my Study with Sadler Online Academy, beginning fairly early in the new year of 2025. We are reprising the Ancient Philosophers on Friendship course that I taught last year, which went quite well, and we're expanding it from a originally 10-week to a 12-week format by including another really important philosophical text. So this is an open enrollment class, which means that you don't have to have a background in philosophy. You don't need to be in any sort of program. All you have to have is an interest and willingness to learn and engage with the course materials that I'll tell you about in just a minute. Now, why friendship? Well, it's a really important topic to all of our lives. It covers a vast variety of other topics and issues and questions that arise from us. And as it turns out, people in ancient times, particularly philosophers, were just as confused and concerned about it as we are in our present, and quite a few of them wrote some great works that help us ask the right questions, think through matters, use distinctions, and even arguments to make sense out of the relationships that we have. So we're going to be looking at friendship. We're going to be looking at all the things that look like friendship but actually aren't. And, the requirements of having a good friendship, how to extricate yourself from friendships that are going south or not turning out the way that you want, and a whole bunch of other topics. So here's some nuts and bolts about the class. It is going to be meeting for 12 weeks on Thursdays at 9 a.m. Central Time for class sessions that will run anywhere from 90 to 120 minutes, depending on how much material we have to cover and how interested the students are. So you do want to check your time zone to see whether you're available at that time. And we will be meeting every single week. We'll have some texts, some thinkers, some topics to work through. I will lecture, but my lectures, as I think many of you already know, are very, very interactive. So lecture, discussion, question and answer. I will be raising issues for people. We'll talk about how to apply all of this great stuff. And we're going to begin on January 16th, which is a Thursday again. And we'll just continue on from there. So let me tell you a little bit about the curriculum that we'll be going through. And some of these names are probably familiar to you, and perhaps some of them are somewhat new. Every single one of them has something interesting, valuable, insightful to teach us about friendship. So the very first week of the class, we're going to begin with some sort of preliminary big picture stuff, and then we're going to dive right into our first big thinker, and that's Plato. He actually has a dialogue specifically about friendship called the Lysis, which is fairly early in his works. And we're also going to look at a really important discussion about both friendship and the opposite of it, enmity, hatred, enemies, in Republic Book 1, and whether we can base an ethics or a social theory on the distinction between friend and enemy, and how we can tell friends and enemies apart. Then in week 2 and week 3, we're going to dive into the thought of another really important thinker. You're probably familiar with Aristotle as a theorist of friendship, particularly in Nicomachean Ethics Book 8, and that's what we're going to look at very, very closely in week 2. In week 3, we're going to continue on into Nicomachean Ethics Book 9, and we're going to look at his Eudamian Ethics Book 7, which is a really nice complement to the Nicomachean Ethics treatment. We'll also bring in a few other discussions here and there about what friendship involves and requires. Then in week 4, we're going to look at Epicureans, and we'll read a bit of Epicurus, his principal doctrines, and the Vatican sayings. We'll also look at a discussion about Epicureans and friendship that's put into the mouth of an Epicurean by somebody who's not an Epicurean, Marcus Tullius Cicero. In his On the Ends, Book 1, he has his friend Torquatus speaking up for the Epicureans. And then we're going to look at selections, not the entirety, of a really important work, Lucretius's On the Nature of Things, which does have some remarks about friendship as well. So by that time, we'll have 3 main perspectives on friendship. Week 5, we're going to come back to Cicero, who just so happens to have a really important dialogue, which is officially titled Laelius, but is actually usually called On Friendship. And Cicero is going to take Aristotle's thought and take it to an entire new level, probing into questions that Aristotle left open, giving us some really helpful advice, particularly about what to do when our friendships aren't working that well. Then in week 6, we're going to come to another really key thinker on these matters from ancient times, and that is Seneca, the Stoic philosopher. And we're going to spend a couple weeks on his works. So in week 6, we are going to look at one of his shorter works, which has to do with the notion of being friends with philosophers on the shortness of life. And then we're going to look at a whole bunch of his letters that, help us to define friendship, speculate about whether wise people or, the Stoic sage actually needs friends or not. The answer is yes. And a bunch of other topics, including like what we ought to do when we lose our friends, how we ought to grieve them. Then in week 7, we're going to start a much more substantive work of Seneca's called On Benefits. And this has to do not just with friendship, but doing favors to other people, how to show gratitude properly, how to have things in the right perspective, how to show reciprocity, and what to do when other people aren't displaying that to us. So we're going to look at books 1 through 4 in week 7, and then we'll follow that up in week 8 by going through books 5 through 7 and perhaps reviewing anything that we needed to get to in book 4 that we didn't. So we're going to have a number of different perspectives by 2/3 of the way through the class, and then we're going to add some other new ones. We're going to return to Platonism in week 9, looking at Plutarch, the great Middle Platonist philosopher, who happens to have 2 really interesting works. One of them is dealing with the question, can you have a lot of friends? And it's on having many friends. Plutarch's answer is, well, it's difficult. And then, even more importantly, we have another text that I think is incredibly useful in our own time called How to Tell a Flatterer from a Friend. And he's going to give us all sorts of interesting considerations there. Week 10, somebody who you may not have heard of, but is also a really interesting author from ancient times, Dio Chrysostom. We're going to be looking at his discourses, number 1, 3, 12, 38, and 74, all of which have to do with this topic of friendship and are raising some additional perspectives from a, let's call it, relatively cynic perspective. We return to Stoicism in week 11, looking at what Epictetus in his Enchiridion and Discourses has to say about friendship, which turns out to be a lot. And then we finish the class in our 12th week by turning to an author who has a philosophical education, not exactly a philosopher, but rather a satirist, but he also has some really interesting things to say about friendship, and that is Lucian, who has a book called Toxaris on friendship, and a book about, we're sort of returning to the topic of what do we do about real friends? It's called the parasite, or the person who hangs on you. So those are the texts, thinkers, topics we're going to be looking at in this course. Again, if you want to enroll in it, it's in the Study with Sadler Academy. You see the link down below. It's running for 12 weeks. You can attend as many sessions as you want. We'll record all the sessions, so if you miss one or if you miss a bunch of them, you can still participate. We're going to have handouts. We're going to have worksheets. All the recordings you can view at any time that you want. And the coolest thing about this, once you sign up for the class, how long do you get access to it? Lifetime. That's what I let people do in my academy because I think it's a cool thing to do. And so we're going to start on January 16th. I hope that you can join me for what's going to be a really great, intensive class. You don't have to have a background in philosophy, but it certainly can't hurt. And even if you don't, you're going to come out of it with a really great, solid understanding of these thinkers, these texts, these problems, these topics, these questions. And I hope that it will also help you in your own ordinary real life to apply some of these things. This is philosophy coming from the ancients, incredibly applicable to our late modern times, condition, and problems. So that's enough from me. You can check out the link below, see if you want to sign up for the class. If you do, I'm happy to have you in there, and we're going to have a great time for roughly about a little under 3 months, 12 weeks, and it's going to be a really great education. So check it out, and hopefully I'll see some of you there in the class.